Welcome back to the Unstuck movement. This podcast and this platform is for you to build the strength, to build the perseverance, to build the faith that you need in your life to overcome those things that have been holding you back, to break the chains of the things that have been stopping you, either mentally or physically in your life, to help us get unstuck. And I like to have this platform as motivation for you, as proof that these things can happen. So I bring amazing people on the show who have overcome incredible things in their life, who can help you make that your message into your life that impacts somebody else. Today, I have the incredible Daniel Andrews with us. Now, Daniel is a native of Columbia, South Carolina, where he currently resides. He owns a business that shows business people how to identify, find, meet, and nurture professional relationships with key referral partners. Fundamentally, he shows business people how to stop networking and start building true networks. This is his fourth career. He's been successfully self-employed for 35 years, 49 years, if you start with the lemonade stand in first grade. So from the lemonade stand in first grade to now, here you are, my friend. Daniel, thank you so much for being a part of the Unstuck movement.
I thank you for having me, Rob. I have so much respect for you as a person and what you're trying to accomplish, and the light and love you're trying to bring to the world. So I'm honored to be part of this conversation.
Oh, thank you, man. That means a lot. So this podcast, I always start with a question. I feel like important questions, like John Maxwell said, good leaders ask great questions. So the better questions we ask, the better answers we get in life. So I want to start this off with a question for you.
Sure.
How did you decide to build trust instead of buying trust? And what did that look like in your unstuck journey?
Sure. And I'll try to keep the story as short as possible without skipping any of the relevant portions of this. But Columbia, South Carolina is my hometown. And I went off to college, came back here, ran a business here for 13 years after that, built around direct sales, in-home sales. And it was referral based, and quite successful at it. But when I moved from here to St. Louis in 2003, I decided I wanted to be, more than that, right? And I was going to be a sales trainer or do something different, right? I was going to move into the B2B space, elevate, what I delivered, and ended up working in employee benefits, right? The promise of repeating income, right? You get some insurance products sold, and then the revenue comes in, which it does, by the way, still getting paid 20 years later. But launched that and in St. Louis, which I think is a pretty weird town, meaning there's some extremes that you experience other places. I had a great idea, would bring it to people, but they wouldn't do business with me, even though I had a great idea and a great plan, and the value proposition was quite open. And I would get stuck and hung up at the point of the decision maker. With employee benefits, of course, the decision maker is the business owner or the HR executive, right? And then you got to get to the employees from there. But I was having trouble getting to the employees. And so I realized that I needed more than just a strong value proposition, right? That the thing itself wasn't sufficient to get the deal done. And I ended up, it's not unusual in the insurance world for people to work cases together, particularly if there's multiple moving parts, multiple locations, or a lot of employees that have to be seen in a small window of time. So it's not unusual to bring other insurance agents in to help with different parts and to give them part of the revenue. So I met a guy named Bert. I'll leave the last names out of this because he's still on LinkedIn. And he was local. He'd lived in St. Louis his whole life. And he used to meet a guy named Butch. And Butch's family owns one car dealership in every franchise, every manufacturer, like 12 in St. Louis, not even spread around the state. So clearly a nice concentration of a lot of employees. And Bert and I went to call on Butch to make the deal happen. I had committed to giving Bert 30% of the commissions available, when the deal went down, if it went down. And I remember standing there in front of Bert and Butch, and they're talking about me, but they're not talking to me, right? So this part of the conversation doesn't involve me. Butch says, "Who is this guy?" and points at me. And Bert says, "He's my guy." And Butch says, "But I don't know this guy." And Bert says, "But I know this guy." And Butch says, "But what happens if something happens to this guy?" And Bert says, "I'll go find another guy that can do what he does." And it was a light bulb for me to realize that they weren't talking about the value proposition, the insurance products that I wanted to bring into the space, and the value that I could bring to the dealership, because we had some value adds for the business owner as well. They were talking about me in the context of trust What was my role in this, right? Meaning if Bert introduced the deal and me, was the deal going to go down, right? Was it going to be a long-standing relationship, right? Bert didn't try to convince him I was a nice guy. Bert didn't try to convince him that I eat healthy and I'd be around forever, right? And wasn't going to leave the city. He leaned on Butch's trust in Bert to make the deal happen. And I'm like, that was a huge light bulb. And, I also realized giving away 30% was it's a poor long-term business model, right?
Yeah.
I could get on a soapbox and talk about the fact that finder's fees are actually typically a bad idea. By the way, that's a whole other topic for a whole other day. If somebody wants to get into it, it's probably not really a topic to focus on here. But finder's fees are probably a bad idea. You get fewer referrals when you offer finder's fee than you would if you didn't. By the way, and if people think that they want to change my mind on that or understand why, you're welcome to get in touch with me. Which is why I changed my name to include my LinkedIn profile, so you can find me there. But anyhow, so I realized, but for me, the moment was it wasn't about the company I repped. It wasn't even about Dan Andrews as much as it was the trust that Bert had in Butch. So I realized that I could build trust with the Berts of the world, people that represented Bert, whether or not they have the same or similar role, people that represented Bert, and then borrow that trust instead of buying that trust. Right. Because number one, 30% is a poor, it's not a good long-term model to give away 30% of what's available in terms of revenue, to me. But also because it creates a little bit of skepticism on Butch's part, right? I'm sure Butch either knew or figured out that Bert was getting part of the deal, which makes it even harder to be convincing. But if Bert had simply introduced me to Butch on the principle that this value is so high, you really ought to do this deal, it might have actually been easier to do, right? Because then Bert's motives wouldn't have been suspect or called into question. But anyway, so that was the moment I'm like, okay, it's actually easier to build it. It's cheaper to build it and easy and borrow it, and it's easier to borrow it if you've built it as opposed to bought it, right? So that was the light bulb for me, that I realized that they were not talking about the product on the table. They weren't even talking about Daniel Andrews. They were talking about, can we trust that this is all going to come together the way it was described as?
Yeah. And I mean, this sort of thing applies to everything in life and not just business, right? Because trust is everything. Relationship is everything. Trust is everything. And oftentimes, well, especially in the world we live in now, a lot of that gets bypassed, or people try to hijack it. They try to hijack trust. They try to skip the steps that are necessary to create those relationships. What does that look like for you to build that trust? I think because a lot of people, and I've learned this from just having a couple of conversations with you, that trust factor, having real conversation, building real relationship is everything. So how do you help people along that journey? Like for somebody who's trying to figure out how to do that, maybe they're in sales and they want to make sales. Obviously, if you're in sales, we all need to have an income, whatever that looks like.
Right.
But how do you go about it in a way that's not sleazy, that's not in a way of that's not inauthentic? Because I think some people really struggle with that area and they have a difficult time building those relationships.
Correct. Right. And let's briefly identify why people might not be. Okay. I don't think you say, how do you do it in a way that's not sleazy? That's self-contradictory, meaning you're not truly building trust if you're doing it insincerely, right? So meaning you haven't built trust yet. Right. Would be the first thing. But why don't people do it? Because I think that's important to identify, because I think most people consider themselves to be genuine, sincere people. And I suspect most of them that think they are probably are. But either they're seduced by the easy work of, exposure. Right. If I could just get enough likes and follows on social media or LinkedIn, or, if I pay for enough SEO, and depending on your industry, that might get you there. Right. Nobody's ever recommended a product to me on Amazon. Everything I ever bought from Amazon, I knew what I wanted and I got it. Now, Amazon has recommended a few things to me. Oh, you want this? Maybe you want that. Okay. But, if you're in a commodities business, right, if I'm trying to get the best price on toner, right, I'm not too worried about your reputation as long as I know you're going to ship it, if I pay for it. Right.
Yeah.
But, for anything more sophisticated than a commodity, right, I think trust needs to be there, meaning you can get all the reach you want, right? Christopher Lockhead, that does the Category Pirates podcast, said any marketing that's not directly tied to ROI is called arts and crafts. And so people are seduced by the ease of, if I can just get enough impressions, right? Okay, if I can just make my reach big enough. They could be possibly an introvert, and think that networking as a verb consists of something they don't like, which networking as a verb does, right? I teach people how to stop networking and start building relationships that matter, right? And so introverts actually prefer the quality over quantity, but they don't have a roadmap for quality, right? They think it involves happy hour after happy hour, leads group after leads group, chamber after chamber, right? And if that's what it consisted of, even an extrovert will eventually figure out that might be fun, but it's still not profitable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the reasons they don't primarily is because they don't know that there is a different roadmap. The only roadmap most of us are given for trust is around prospecting. And I get it. Revenue comes from customers. Customers come from prospects. Prospects come from leads and hopefully from introductions. So you have to have a roadmap to trust building, right? If I had a piece of paper out, I'd diagram it. There's a roadmap from meet somebody to building trust to making them a customer.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the notion of building trust with people that may never be your customer, but could still be a quality referral source, what I call a key referral partner? Is there a way to build trust there? And the answer is yes, but nobody's ever been given that roadmap because they think the only thing that matters is that first gen sales, right? And that's why you just before we came on live on this, you and I were talking about the fact that so much of what people experience is networking. When you're out networking and attending networking events, either at the event or somebody books on a call with you, and you realize that they've never been networking; they've only been prospecting. I call it speed prospecting, right? They only have one model, which is, will you be my customer? Yes, no, maybe. Next. Will you be my customer? Yes, no, maybe. Next. And again, we got to get revenue, but it's a shorter route to building and borrowing trust, right? That the level you and I have experienced each other, and we've really only had 3 or 4 conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've been in the same space once or twice, which creates a degree of commonality, right? And I didn't snub you and you didn't snub me, right? So our trust factor is still high from that birthday party that we were both at, right? But there's almost nobody in your world that you wouldn't introduce me to if I told you I had a strong enough value proposition for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't take a long time, but now I have access to all of the people in your trusted network.
Yeah.
And people miss that. I've built relationship with Rob. And if he believes me that I've got something strong to offer Jose or Danica or anybody else, I mentioned people that I have met, mostly people I met Rob through. But anyway, if I couldn't get to those people, right? Or you know what? Jose would be a good example. If I told you I really need to talk to Jose because you have more credit with Jose than I do with this. I know him and he introduced me to you, but you have more credit than I do with him. He's my contact. He's your network. If I said, hey, you got to get me on a phone call with Jose, you would do it. You'd make it happen, or you try to.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And people miss that it's actually a shorter route. At some point, you're going to have to build trust. And once you've done that, you can borrow it. And I mean that in the most polite term, meaning I'm not using you because the reason you would introduce me to somebody if I asked you to a category or a person is because, I would do the same for you. Right. This isn't a one-way street.
That's really good. And that's something that can be lost on people. That's really, really interesting to think about. And it's like the 7 degrees of separation, right? You're connected to so many different people at all times. But to be able to utilize that and to establish that trust, you have access, because I might not be the right person to work with you, but somebody through me might be the perfect person to connect with you. You never know. And like you in the wrong environment, you can use that as like a manipulation tactic. But it's leverage, right? It's leverage, but it's in a very good way. And this is just coming from like the background that I have. Somebody would look at that and be like, oh man, he's just trying to, and I'm sure you've heard this from people. You're just trying to get close to me because you want to get close to that other person or whatever that might look like, but that's just when you're an authentic person. And here's another question. This is what I wanted to ask you as we were going through this. Being genuine and authentic, right? Because when you're genuine and authentic, these kind of situations aren't issues anymore because you know that I'm a real person who really wants to help and serve. And I think some people have a really hard time, and this is where they get stuck. They really have a hard time being genuine and authentic. They really have a difficult time with that, and they can't kind of see past themselves and what they need and what they have to get. And usually that comes down to like the growth versus the fixed mindset. What do you say to that? How have you establish that in your own life? Is that just kind of the way you were brought up, that you're an authentic and genuine person? Is that something you've had to develop over the years? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna drag all my childhood experiences.
Let's go back to the lemonade stand and start.
Go back to the lemonade stand. Yeah, I can give you the short version there, and I would say that and I'll loop back. I would say that there is an appropriate resistance to feeling like I've befriended the Rob Wences of the world, right? Because, I plan to use him, right? And here's how you avoid that. You don't feel used by me because you know that if you needed something from me, you could come to me as well, right? We all get introduced to people through people that we know, right? Up until the advent of internet dating, almost, every relationship was from your hometown, or somebody set you up with their sister, or, I sent, my daughter and a friend on a date, right? Blind date, right? I don't know if it's going to work out, but they knew they weren't going out with an axe murderer, right? They knew that they were at least have a pleasant time. That the evening was going to end in tears, right, so to speak, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're borrowing trust all the time, but it comes from the fact that the person recognizes that I'm trying to help, right? And so I think the way that we show up, meaning in any conversation with Rob Z, I'm prepared to give more than I get. In any conversation. Now, if over time it starts to feel lopsided, I may pull away, or you may pull away if you're giving me more than you're getting, because you might start to feel, right? You may pull away if you're giving more than you're getting, or excuse me, if you're getting more than you're giving, because you start to feel guilty, right? I may pull away because I'm like, all I ever do is pour a rock. But if I'm willing in any conversation to give more than I get in that moment, people can sense that. And that way nobody feels used. We all know that introductions are the way things work. That's why there's a book called Who Not What. That's the whole definition of the book. Right? We borrow the trust that we built in other people. Okay, so how did I get here? I'm transparent and authentic, which works for me and against me. Right? Some people love it, some people hate it. I get a lot of this. I shouldn't say a lot of this. It's not an infrequent occurrence to get, hey Dan, I just want to tell you, when I first met you, I'm like, oh, I know how this sentence ends. I'm like, really? I'm like, yeah, go ahead and finish. But I know how this sentence ends. You're not the first person to say that. And I go, yeah. When I first met you, you really got on my nerves. But now that I know you, you're a good guy. I'm like, okay.
You got to get to know him. I never felt that way about you.
I suspect there's some people that have drifted in the other direction, right? My first wife would tell you that I'm really good in small doses, right? But I chose to be transparent and authentic because my father was a fighter pilot. And if you can think back to the first Top Gun movie, right? Tom Cruise, Maverick was a jerk, but he was the good jerk. And, Iceman was a jerk, but he was the bad jerk, right? They're both jerks. Picture Iceman and Maverick as father. Right? Nothing's ever good enough. There literally nothing you could do that would make them say I'm proud of you. Literally. Okay. So I chose to be authentic because if you're going to love me or hate me, you're going to find that out real quick. Now, again, I'm very curious about the fact that some people evolve into loving me. I'm sure some people evolve into deciding they don't want to hang out with me anymore. But I'm going to be who I am right from the beginning. Right. And that because I'm not up for playing games or trying to win your approval. Now, I'm not a jerk on purpose. Don't mistake. But I tend to be very transparent, always authentic, frequently transparent, occasionally vulnerable with people, depending on how fast we get there. Right. But I mean, it's vulnerability to tell people, that my dad left me with the feeling that I was never good enough. Right. That's a degree of vulnerability. I'm talking to people I don't even know who I'm talking to. Who's going to hear this.
Hi, my name is Jose Escobar, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Connected Leaders Academy. We're a growing tribe, a community of entrepreneurs all over the world, globally, all across the country, high performers, titans of industry. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to grow personally and professionally, scale your influence, develop your skill sets, move the needle in your business, more clients, more money, more profit, the bottom line, and of course, grow your circle and your network like never before, this is where you want to be. Join the Connected Leaders Academy today. We are scaling massively. We want to welcome you in. Check me out on Instagram and on Facebook, the @ JAESCO25. We look forward to having you join us. Take care.
And I can resonate with that, man. That's one of those things that the vulnerability breaks down walls, right? And it's really, as far as connection goes and building those trusting relationships, when you're vulnerable with somebody else, that's something I always go to. If you're vulnerable with somebody else, then that breaks that barrier where they feel safe to be who they are in front of you, being authentic, which is, it can be, depending on the scenario, I'm speaking personally, depending on the situation I'm in, sometimes it's super easy to be authentic. Sometimes I feel a little bit guarded Usually in a big room with a lot of people I don't know, I'm a little bit guarded. Most people are. Most people don't come in there just spilling their guts about their entire life, right? But in certain situations, I'm fully willing to be. I'm able, I guess I should say, not willing, but I'm fully able to be authentic. And I think the more I work on this for myself, the more I realize, man, you can tell when you're not being you, and you can tell when you're being you, and people can also tell whether they know it or not, whether they know you or not. They pick up on that. You pick up on somebody being really and truly authentic. So I think that the best piece of advice that I get from what you're saying right now is like, really work on how do I be more authentic? How do I really be genuinely myself? And if you don't even know who you are, maybe I'm getting a little bit too deep on this, but like for me, it has to go here. If I'm going to be authentic with other people, then I've got to really figure myself out. For me, the biggest thing has been figuring out my vision, right? So I talk to people all the time about this. The more I figure out and get clear on what my vision is for my life and what I'm supposed to be doing, the easier everything gets. But when I'm living my life for everybody else and being pulled in a million different directions, then I don't know who I am. So how am I going to be authentic if I don't know who I am?
Well, and I want to make, some layers of distinction among layers, I should say, right? I think we should always be authentic, right? Because it will come back to bite you later if you're like, yeah, I didn't really mean that thing I said, right? That will always hurt you.
Yes.
I think we should frequently be transparent. Now, obviously, if I'm a local manufacturer and I'm hurting for employees, or there's been or I'm going to have to announce a recall soon, I may not mention that at the chamber networking event where someone can overhear me, right? It might cost me future sales, or the competitors might try to use that against me or something like that. But I think we can frequently be transparent. Vulnerability may take people to a place they don't want to go, right? I had to counsel somebody recently who's one of my clients. I said, not everybody needs to hear about your childhood, trauma behind childhood abuse, right? Being abused as a child, right? Not everybody needs to hear that initially, right? So I think we need to be aware of who our audience is in terms of how personal, deep, in his case, a little bit dark that we're going to get, right?
That's really good information, man.
Right.
I'm going to write that down, because
but we should always be authentic. We should probably be transparent more frequently than we are. Vulnerability is reserved for people that have, that have built enough trust to make you think they're going to be emotionally safe, right? Psychologically safe for you to share that.
Yeah.
But those aren't three different things. It's just different layers of the same thing.
It's like the deeper levels of it, right? Because when you meet somebody who's like overly vulnerable and just like spilling out things about them, you're like, whoa, we're not at this place yet. And it can be too much, especially depending on the person. I can handle that kind of stuff. I'm fine with that. But somebody else, that's going to freak them out and they're going to run.
Right. If it reminds them of things, yeah.
Yeah, man. That's really, really good. And you said too, something else I thought was really good. Stop networking. Start building relationships that matter.
Yep.
And the networking's got such a bad term. It has a bad feeling to it, which I don't think that people mean for it to. But building relationships that matter sounds so much better. It just sounds right.
It does. And I think people understand generically quality is better than quantity, right? I think people want to be sincere. They just have never been given a roadmap for how do you build trust with somebody that you're not trying to convert to a customer, right? And even if, for example, that I decided that Rob might be a target market for me, I'm not going to, unless it's so obvious to both of us that it just has to be said early on, I would much rather talk with Rob about who my prospects are and what they look like and how he might identify them. Because the reality is, even if Rob is or is not a prospect, he knows way more than one person that could be my prospect, right? Meaning if I settle for just selling to Rob, I've got one transaction. But if I ask Rob who he knows, I might get 4 or 5 or 10 or 100 transactions out of it. But if I ask Rob who he knows that knows the sort of people that I need to talk to, right, then I'm going to get even more access. Now, what's cool about that is I'm talking to Rob and describing who I'm looking for. And it may be in the first or second or third conversation, but it may be one day that Rob holds his hand up and goes, I want one of those conversations. Would love to have you in one of those conversations, Rob. I never wanted to assume that you wanted one, but since you've identified yourself as somebody that fits the demographic or psychographic that I'm looking for, I'd be happy to have it.
Yeah, and that's
right?
too, it's very important too, right? That you don't have to be going for the sale every single time, because what's normally going to happen is you have to plant a lot of seeds, right? You plant a lot of seeds, build a lot of relationships, and then things are going to start coming to you. But if you are just trying to go sale after sale after sale, and you're kind of forcing that agenda, you're not building the trusting relationship, and you're not building the large pool of people who are going to be coming to you over time. A lot of those things aren't going to happen in an instant. It's going to be gradual.
And people miss that it's gradual, but it doesn't have to necessarily be slow, right? I was at a networking event. Well, it's not even a networking event, but there's a networking that's done just before the event. It's an open event, 1 million cups. A lot of cities have it. And this guy comes up to me and he's got on the name of a local roofing company. I don't know who may see this, so I'll leave the name of the roofing company out. Not that I'm going to say anything bad about them, but I said, "Oh, I recognize that roofing company. Y'all have several locations around town." He goes, "Yeah, we're pretty big." I said, "Are you new then? Have you started recently?" Because I hadn't seen him before at anything else in the city. And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Great." He goes, "Who do you know that needs a roof?" Great question, crappy timing.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, had he scheduled to spend 20 minutes with me or 30,
right,
where we get to know each other, he could have asked that question conceivably as early as the end of that first paired interview. That first coffee, I use the phrase paired interview to stand for coffee, breakfast, lunch, Zoom, whatever, right? All together, right? Paired interview is when we're talking one-to-one, right? And building trust. It doesn't have to be a long way out, but that was way early. I don't know if the company does good work. I never told him that I knew the company did work. I just said, I know they're big. That's all I said about it.
Mm-hmm.
If I'd said, "Oh, I'm a fan of that roofing company, man, they did my house or they did my neighbor's house and they did great work and they raved about it. It's a great price and great value and blah, blah, blah." Then he might say, "Oh, do you know anybody that needs one?" Right. But I'd never given him any indication that I had any trust in him or the product/service that they provide. So it was way early, but it doesn't have to be months of relationship building, right? We're not talking about romance and marriage and future and raising kids together, right? You can build trust pretty quickly. I'll give you one other fast example. I'm in a room once a week, and one of the people in there, Ariel, I over, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, the only place we would ever seen each other is in this room of about 8 to 10 people that meet once a week. Okay. A Zoom. I say room, Zoom. And I think several of us hung out once at a football game here locally. That's the entirety of my relationship building with Ariel, right? So I say to the room, Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., I'm looking for somebody in the niche staffing company or an executive recruiter at 10 a.m. I say 10 a.m. The meeting runs from 9:30 to 10:30, so roughly 10 a.m. By 11 a.m. that morning, and I have the timestamps, so I've got screenshots I could show. By 11 a.m., she has me in a conversation with a guy. She goes, his first name's Dan. She's like, "Daniel, meet Dan." Haha, she thinks that's cute. Okay, whatever. "Hey, Dan, Daniel is looking for somebody in your industry." "Hey, Daniel, Dan might not be the right guy, but Dan, if you're not the right guy, can you take Daniel to the right place?" He says, "All right, what do you got?" I send him 5 sentences. He replies back, "I'm not the right one. I'm going to send you to Anna." Okay, if Anna's not the right one, let me know and I'll help you find the right one. I get into by 11:29, I'm in a dialogue with Anna. We both drift away from our computers. We said, "Yeah, I got to go somewhere. I'll get back to this." By 10 o'clock that night, she sent me a link to 30 minutes on her calendar. I'd asked for 15. She gave me a link for 30. Now, that doesn't mean the deal's done, right? But in 12 hours, I got from Daniel to Ariel to Dan to Anna.
Yeah.
And I hadn't spent any more time building a relationship with Ariel than I did the other 8 or 9 people in the room, right? I could have asked that from any of them. So it's not necessarily a long time or a huge effort. But did you notice, by the way, that I didn't have to double back to Ariel and go, "All right, Dan isn't the right guy. How can I get to the right person?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
She only introduced me to somebody that trusted her, and he only introduced me to somebody, and he was willing to keep introducing me to people, right? Because he had trust in Ariel. He was treating me the way Ariel asked him to treat me because he trusted Ariel. Ariel trusted me. Anna trusts Dan. Dan trusts Ariel. Ariel trusts me. So you can move very quickly to a huge number of people, meaning not everybody that Anna knows is who I need to know. Not everybody that Dan knows is who I need to know. But of those people that I want to know, they each are picking from a very large pool that they can introduce me to. So it doesn't take a long time, but it is a process that doesn't involve asking somebody to buy your thing the minute you meet them.
Right. Amazing. I love this. This is so good. So as we wrap this up, how could people get in touch with you? How could they get involved with what you're doing? If they want to have a conversation like this, if they want to add you to their network to be able to build trusting relationships.
Sure.
What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah. Find me on LinkedIn, right? I think I put that in there. If you put linkedin.com/IN, right, you'll know how to find the URL, and then NIA Southeast, which is the name of my LLC. Don't ask. You can get to me there. You can also find me. You can't Google even my full name because I share a full name, Daniel Patrick Andrews, with a bombastic Australian parliamentarian who takes up the first 1 million Google hits when you
Oh,
Google
I thought that was you.
But if you go to danielpatrickandrews.com, right, it's just a placeholder website. It's not particularly fancy. It's not very detailed, but you can at least find my contact info and about 40 testimonials about the quality of the work that I do.
Cool.
But yeah, more than anything, I would encourage them to get in touch with me, probably through LinkedIn. I will give them an opportunity to get into a conversation, a little workshop I do every now and then, 25 minutes to talk about the difference between low value networking and high value networks. And if you notice that I use two different forms of the word, I did it on purpose. And I'll explain it in this little 25-minute thing. But what's cool about that is at the end of that 25 minutes, the people that are listening to this, if they engage with me, get the link for this, they'll be able to go, oh, I want more of category number 4, or not. But it's a low-key way for people to decide for themselves if talking to Daniel Andrews at length is a thing worth doing. But I've got a very simple roadmap. It's a group coaching program of 8 weeks. So it's a personalized coaching program of 12 weeks. Whatever you choose, of the roadmap of how to build trust, right? It's just very straightforward.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom. And I want to ask the audience this question because I always do this. I asked Daniel the question at the beginning. I'm going to ask you now. How do you decide? What is it going to look like for you to decide to start building trust instead of buying trust? And what does that look like for you in your life? So reach out to Daniel and start that journey, start that path. Thank you, sir, for being a part of the Unstuck movement. I think this is something for a lot of people, a place where we need to get unstuck from. And a lot of people get stuck in this place for most of their professional career. So this is really valuable information that people need to move forward. And I just want to honor you and thank you for being a part of the platform.
I do like to think I'm helping people get out of the routines that aren't getting them the results they want.